Hey, virtual students, we're here with Unit 5, Part 1, and your notes are going to look like this. You're really just kind of following along, filling in the blanks as we go through this presentation. You'll see what you're supposed to write is actually going to be in blue, so that'll kind of indicate what you are writing down. I try to make it as simple as possible for you. So starting you off here, we are answering a couple questions. So just a quick yes or no. Okay, so you came up with an answer there, and what we'll find out here is that all three, well, the top program is referred to as Social Security. This does exist. We'll get into that here today. Number two is referred to as Medicare, where we provide health insurance for retired age people. Number three is that's an opinion about the military and the overspending. Should we raise taxes? And so those are all obviously opinion questions. These three programs up here are our three biggest spending areas in the United States, and those are going to play obviously a significant role in what we're talking about today. Okay, so overall, our government is increasing spending. So our government's doing more for economically for people than probably ever before. And just as a little bit of a number, it's about 25% of GDP. We'll kind of look at some stats here as we move forward. You'll get an idea of why we refer to it that way. Okay, so this is a graph of government spending as that percentage of GDP. You can see before the 1930s, and I'll show you a lengthier time of graph here in a second, that spending was way lower as a percentage of GDP than it is, obviously, in more recent times. And so, one of the things too, we remember these gray bars are recessions. Well, remember as a percentage of GDP, what happens? The reason why we have these spikes during recessions is that two things are occurring. Number one is we have government policies in place that increase spending for during recessions when people are unemployed. We pay those people, right? Just as a simple example. And we are also producing less, right? So it creates this bigger gap between, how much we're collecting and how much we're producing our GDP and how much we are spending. So this is a little bit. This is our government debt. All right, and you can see kind of the same thing. That's a little bit more of a better representation of, okay, we increase spending on people that can't afford things, and we also decrease what we receive. So our debt grows during recessions in these particular cases. Graphs aren't updated. COVID statistics aren't all in and stuff like that. So graphs aren't updated, which brings me to a little bit of a disclosure here, or a disclaimer. If you're depending on when you're watching these videos, I'm recording in May of 2021, and so just these numbers would change possibly if you're watching this way later. You won't be tested on the numbers. So the concepts that we're talking about are all applicable to what you'll be tested on. But we do have some stats. As of May, we're about $28.2 trillion in debt. We'll go to this website here in a second. If you're way past May 2021, you'd be able to see that the debt clock. You'll be able to type this in, and you'll see it. We'll pull it up here in a second. Just some things. I give you some numbers here. We were only about $10 trillion in debt in 2007. So we've almost tripled that throughout the course of the last 13, 14 years. In 2020, the weird COVID year, the government overspent by about $3.5 trillion. What 2021 holds, it's kind of unclear, but it's looking to be pretty much about identical to what that overspending was. And so, again, just some numbers there. You won't be tested on those. The big number that the reason the debt becomes important is this idea of paying interest. Okay, so when the government overspends, they have to borrow money. They borrow money from, well, basically the same people you and I can borrow money from, banks. Obviously, if somebody you can invest in the government through like savings bonds and things like that. But the government has to pay interest on that borrowed money. And in 2020, we paid about $340 billion in interest. So you can pull up this clock on your own. This is where I kind of get my numbers here, and it's public knowledge. They've obviously made it look a little bit more appealing or dramatic with all the stuff they have in there in this count up, calculator, or whatever you want to call it. So 28.2. Down here are our biggest spending programs, as I kind of mentioned in the daily blog. This is where we're at. Our interest on the debt, in this particular case, almost up to $400 billion. And so you can kind of see some things. There is some lack of clarity. It is trying to be real time. The actual statistics at the end of the year are posted on the White House's website. You could find those if you wanted to. But either way, these are kind of the numbers. Okay, so let's kind of talk about some of the challenges of decreasing this debt. Okay, and if the debt's too big, I don't know if the debt is too big. The kind of rule about borrowing money is as long as people keep loaning it to you, your debt's not necessarily too big. Okay, so people keep loaning our government money, whether or not their debt's too big, as long as they are still able to borrow it in these emergency type situations, I guess you could argue that the debt is not too big. When does it get too big? I'm not sure, right? That's when people stop loaning the government money. Here's a little bit more historical. You can see we have some big changes in, how our government operates. We talked about it a previous unit about how the government was, basically hands off, right? Well, the government doesn't do too much. Look how little they spent through, basically up to the Civil War. Obviously, a spike during wartime gets back to, what was normal before, right before World War II, big spike, and then getting back to normal after that. 1930s, remember what happened? That's the New Deal. Big philosophical shift by how the government did things. The government said, hey, listen, we can help people out that need help. And we start these programs, Social Security included, we'll talk about here in a second, unemployment insurance, distributing money to people that need help, okay, with their income. And so we have that big change. World War II occurs. After World War II, we get into another conflict, the Korean War. But then after World War II, we really start maintaining a military rather than building a military every time we get into a big conflict. So we start maintaining the military through the 1950s and 60s, obviously to what it is today. Um, and then in the 70s, late 60s and 70s, we started trying to redistribute income for people that were lower income. Okay, so poverty programs. Um, Lyndon Johnson called it the war on poverty back in the late 1960s, and so those few different, really significant, philosophical shifts, so to speak, really kind of changed how our government viewed how they were going to spend. Okay. But we do have some economic goals. Obviously, the government provides education. The government provides, hopefully some restrictions on pollution. Um, Hopefully they protect consumers. They do some things to make our society safer. Do they do too many things sometimes? Probably. Do they not do enough sometimes? Probably. But those are like their goals. What are they trying to do? We also maintain a court system, and again, that idea of safety, creating a society that people can, flourish in and be able to, become successful if they do the things they need to do. All right, just quick here, answer this question. We're going to talk about the answer to this question into this Social Security. Okay, so the biggest single spending program, okay, is Social Security. It is about 22% of our nation's spending. Now, with the COVID stuff, I have 2019 years in there. With the COVID stuff, some of these percentages might be skewed a little bit. So I just kept it in 2019 to try to give it, a more accurate baseline. Again, not things you need to necessarily memorize, but either way, that's why some of my years are a little bit off. Okay, so here's the pros, and here's what the program is. Once you reach a certain age, right now it's about 66 years old. Okay, you are allowed to collect Social Security. Now you have to work in the program. You pay, actually, those of you that get a paycheck, you pay 6.2% of your paycheck towards Social Security every single time you collect your money, and so that money goes into it. As long as you work for 72 months, you're able to qualify for Social Security. Kind of depending on how old you decide to be before you collect it, on average, we're paying, recipients about probably close to 15, 16, $1,700 a month. That's about $400 a week. Go back to my little daily blog there, which $400 a week about the equivalent of a $10 an hour job. So anyway, keeping that in mind, there are some positives. Number one positive is it gives these people an income. Let's talk about how that kind of trickles through the economy. Number one is it keeps demand for goods high. And that is good because obviously the people that collect Social Security, they're able to go and spend money places and create incomes for people, right? So it does also create the incentive to stop working. So as I get older, I'm less productive. I stop working. That might open up a new job for someone else, right? That's younger, if you wanted to look at it that way. It also gives these people some independence. If you've ever seen the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or Willy Wonka, I'm talking the original with the original. I can't remember which one it is. Whether it's not Johnny Depp, okay? And Charlie lives in the house with his four grandparents. Well, this is before Social Security recipient time, right? So those old people that couldn't work anymore, they couldn't take care of themselves, they had to move back in with their younger kids, and so it creates that ability for older people to be able to stay on their own and be independent. All right. Now, the challenges is that our population is getting really old. Okay, the baby boomers are retiring. The baby boomers are retiring, and they aren't able to necessarily, where they're not having as many kids to support them through Social Security, and it's going to be a challenge as we move into the future. Now, the other thing is if I am a young person, so like 20 years old, right, and I'm paying into Social Security, I'm paying up this ladder, right? And as I get 30 years old, I'm still paying into it. As I get to 50 years old, I've paid into it for a long time, right? And I'm paying into this program to be when I'm 65 years old, now I can collect it, right? And so all these people at the bottom are supporting people at the top. Some people would call that a pyramid scheme. And so, which again, if I'm 55 years old and I've been paying Social Security and I die, right, and now I don't get to collect it, I lose all that money I paid into it for those 30 years or whatever, right? And so it's not a perfect system, but as long as you live to be, 65 or whatever, it's there for you. But there are some criticisms regarding that. All right, the next biggest program is Medicare. Again, same group of people. We've got our 65 and older population, and um, again, another big chunk of money, 16.5% or so. That gives us about almost up to 40% of our money are going towards people that collect Medicare and Social Security. Okay. Now, Medicare is a form of health insurance for people that are old. Health insurance is tricky. The insurance industry is tricky because, as you guys I'm sure know, car insurance for you guys is more expensive than it is as you become older. The idea is because you guys are supposedly bad drivers. So when you're a bad driver and you are at risk of getting in accidents, we raise your insurance premiums, okay? And we make you have to pay more to be a part of it. Well, old people are bad at staying healthy, so to speak. And so if the insurance companies were allowed to set prices based on that stuff, older people would have to pay a higher amount of money than younger people that stay healthy more often. Well, the problem with that is that older people are stopping working. Okay, so they're not going to work anymore, and so they're not earning a higher income, right? So the challenge is that, okay, how do we provide health insurance for these people? Well, 1.4% of your paychecks go to Social Security, or I'm sorry, Medicare tax. Same kind of similar to Social Security. Now, to be a part of Medicare, a recipient has to be a part of paying into it. Okay, the good news is kind of the same stability things as Social Security over here. It doesn't necessarily take so much income that old people would have to depend on their kids. It provides obviously a chance for them to keep some income and spend it in other places. And then we've kind of got the cons as the same, right? Our population is getting older, they're living longer, there's a higher percentage of people that are old. Those same challenges as Social Security, minus the pyramid scheme part where if you don't make it, then you've lost kind of those taxes that you've paid into it. I don't have to, but people that qualify have to pay a premium every month or every year to stay on this. So they actually pay for it while they're able to utilize the program. All right, so the last couple ones here, these are welfare assistance. We'll throw unemployment insurance in there too. This number is going to be significantly higher for the years of 2020 and 2021 due to COVID. Okay, so you can see back in 2010, at the height of the recession, that $700 billion, only $300 billion in 2019 before COVID hit. Um, Same kind of pros, right? I qualify for this because I don't have an income or I have a low income. Sometimes it's referred to as a safety net. The idea is that if I lose my job, I'm still able to collect some money to go and spend on things in the economy. Okay, so it's not completely shut down. The Great Depression, these programs didn't exist, and unemployment got to the point where it was about 25% in the United States. And so those are things we don't want to see. The challenges are it's expensive, okay? And as we're going into debt, how much money is the right amount of money? People take advantage of it. So we talked about all those things back with our unemployment talk in Unit 4. Um, those challenges of unemployment and how people can take advantage. So those are those are challenging things. Our biggest welfare program is referred to as Medicaid. Okay, so Medicare for old people, Medicaid for low income people. And in 2019, about 13% of our spending, we've got a big chunk of our spending now, right? It allows low income people to collect or receive medical care even if they don't necessarily have access to health insurance. This isn't necessarily the same thing as Obamacare. It's halfway similar. They're trying to accomplish kind of the same things, but Medicaid is in places if my hospital bill is too high, okay, then the government is going to cover some of that cost. And depending on what my income is, they're going to cover different costs or amounts. Okay, so anyway, same kind of safety nets as the unemployment insurance and things like that. Um, Same challenges. If a lot of people qualify for it, it becomes expensive for the government. The military spending, okay, is another big number. Again, you can pick you I think you can probably come up with the pros of military spending. Obviously, we're extremely involved in other countries and trying to keep them safe and trying to promote democracy and those types of things. Those are all the pros, right? To add to that, maybe something that wouldn't necessarily be on the forefront of your mind is that the military buys stuff, and the military buys stuff from private companies. And so those private companies receive an income from the military when they buy airplanes or tanks or uniforms or boots or whatever. And so, if we were going to cut the spending on some of those things, the private sector might be hurt eventually as well. Okay, so they do provide, again, do they provide enough? Do they provide too much? That's a different conversation, but those are the general pros. Obviously, the cons, depending on what side you're on, is it the United States job to be involved overseas? That's up for you to decide. Those are again the challenges of trying to keep things straight in a global society. All right, real quick, pick one that you're going to cut from. All right, and the last thing we'll talk about is these programs. Sometimes these welfare programs go by a few different names. You can list them on there. Um, notice the chunk of spending, and we'll talk about it tomorrow or in the next part here. 3.4 trillion on these programs we just mentioned today. Okay, and we'll throw interest in there too. Okay, so we're talking about 70 to 80% of our spending go on those programs that we just talked about today. We're going to talk about some of those challenges when we get into the next part. Email me with questions. We'll talk.